Transport network automation has been an increasingly hot topic over the last couple of years, particularly if you're a transport network analyst like me, something you look at quite regularly. And our surveys of operators show that it's an issue that's high in terms of importance for their technology developments over the next couple of years, and it's going to be a long-term burning issue. But there's a lot of hype, and I think it's important to establish what operators are really up to, what they're really thinking about, and what's still science fiction in terms of transport network automation. So, Tanja, I wonder if we might come to you first and get the Vodafone perspective. What is Vodafone trying to achieve with automation? What's realistic in the short term, medium term, and what's not on the agenda yet?
Okay. So we actually do have a large-scale transport network, and lots of different vendors, the different age. Some is very, very legacy. I think you don't really want to know. So it took us actually some time to then get to an automation that is truly an end-to-end automation. But that is what we have implemented by now. With, I would say, we are right now at the level of automation where we do the usual suspect use cases. I would call it, that you are basically saying, you try to optimize routes through the networks in an automatic way. You wouldn't believe it. It gave us a reduction of 75%, so that was really huge. And we thought we have our network well under control. So we do a lot of IP, a lot of IP assurances. We also, and that is just the large scale. When you by using automation, when you reduce hands-on manual work on routers, for us, it is when you automate one use case, it is 30,000 manual intervention. So that is really huge. Or you are saving, sometimes you're just saving 5 minutes, but on the scale of many thousand routers. So that gives you an impression also how important it is and how much there is to be gained. And before we did a lot in the IP space and also a lot in the assurance space, and it was a clear bottleneck because we are not one network. We are actually many transport networks with different architectures, and nearly every project got into that bottleneck that we couldn't do the IT configurations that were needed between the different stacks end to end in our networks. And that finally we have overcome. Also from an automation perspective, we could reduce the number of night shifts dramatically. So that is where we are. I would have said so far so good. But there is also, when I listen to you, I think there is a lot more to come that is then on the roadmap. But then we also need to change the way how we operate the network, the operating model. And I would have said on that one, we are just at the beginning.
Okay, fantastic. And I noticed you didn't use the dreaded 2-letter word there, beginning with A.
That's a bit. Of course, there is AI included, but for me, this is a bit of a buzzword. And we had that early morning discussion today where I said, okay, I try to stay away from it because there is also, we also still do automation from a template perspective, and also that has a high impact already for our network. And then we are starting with self-learning, and then we are starting basically to close the loop, self-optimizing, and then all the AI part comes into play.
That makes sense. Thank you. Sab, how's BT thinking about this? Are you progressing along similar lines? And what do you see as the key success factors for automation?
So from BT perspective, automation is all about getting more efficiency in the way we do things. So I think Rudolf already covered a few bits there in terms of bringing any new capability or service into the network much quicker. And also when it comes to any incidents or anything like that, trying to resolve is a very, very important key factor. So that's one of the key things we need to address. And the other important thing is for us in the mobile network, as a network leader, reliability and availability of the network and the performance is very key. So the automation will unlock some of the benefits to keep that there. And the other important one is automation brings that efficiency, and the machines are very good at doing the repetitive task and very basic task. And by using automation to do those things, we actually relieve the people from spending the time. So it's at the end of the day, it's time. So that the people can spend their time on the high value, high end capabilities, because people get more satisfaction from doing those complex tasks. And people are good at complex tasks, whereas machines are very good at basic tasks. So that's the value we are trying to unlock in BT.
Maybe I can add to that, because there's one topic that, so a few years ago at Swisscom we had a few outages. Well, everyone experiences outages. But this one was the unease was growing. And the reason is because every time we did a root cause analysis of the outage, we would find everything was done okay, but this guy forgot one configuration line that actually 99% of the cases would not have an impact, but exactly when he did that change and that day, network dead. And that did not happen once, that happened a few times. And the unease of having such configurations in the network just grew and grew and grew. And so avoiding errors, not being error prone by automating is also a very important aspect. You shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So removing the risk from the people, but retaining the creativity.
Yeah.
What about the vendor perspective here? You know, what do you see as the key success factors for automation amongst operators, Mike? And how should operators measure success?
So I think one mistake people often make when they start an automation project is they try to take something that's very complex, and they may throw in AI and machine learning because they want to do something that's going to make them look good internally. But the real key important factor is to be grounded in business outcomes. And it's to look at, am I saving time? Am I saving expense? Am I reducing risk? And very often, the areas that have the biggest impact are simple. And it's, am I doing the right number of pre-checks? Am I then going through and doing an upgrade of a router or a device, and then doing a thorough post-check? As Rudolf mentioned, it's often some of the smartest people that are operators skip these checks because they're so confident or they made an assumption. So I think every project should start with baselining of where you are today as an operator, and then have very clear measures of how often you're automating something, and then show that benefit back. Too often you get a CFO or somebody asking, you've been at this for 2 years, what do you have to show for it? And it's good to have, we've done 5,000 of these automated procedures. Each one has saved us 20 minutes. Maybe it wasn't that much, but if I looked at that over a long period of time, it's very significant, and it helps build that momentum in a company.
What's the role of the vendor in the relationship with the operator there? How much of the process of automation and innovation needs to come from the vendor? How much from the operator?
I think, I would describe this as core versus context. An operator is in charge of their network. They know what is important. They know how it relates back. A vendor can bring in best practices. We can share some common modular use cases that we've used across different environments. But ultimately, the vendor the service provider, the telco needs to run their network, and we're just there to assist and guide and work on it in partnership.
Fantastic, thank you. Rudolf, you've talked about the process that your organization's been through in transforming to becoming agile. I mean, in terms of automation and thinking about the transport network, what are the biggest barriers that you faced in that process? And how did you go about overcoming those?
Yeah, well, maybe you can then come back to the reskilling topic. Biggest resistance is, well, I've been doing this for so many years successfully, why should I change? That is one of the things. Another thing that we constantly heard is, well, we cannot do CI/CD in networks because networks are different than IT. Yeah, these are claims. They might have been true a few years ago. They're not true today anymore. And as I said, the unease increased in the company with mistakes being made, which you cannot avoid because they're just human. And so we decided to go on that path. And maybe to add, we were really helped by Cisco at that time. So a vendor was really strong in supporting us. Like, how do you do CI/CD? What are the best practices there? And helped us in creating prototypes, showing the people that it can be done. Yeah, and then together we went on the journey.
And so the convincing is a matter of showing people what can be achieved rather than edict from the top, you will do it this way.
Telling didn't help. So it was really a matter of let's get our hands dirty and see if it functions at all. I have to say also one pivotal moment was where we had a young engineer, he was maybe 23, 24, joining a relatively old operations team. And I talked to that engineer and he said, yeah, I wrote a tool that automates lab testing and everything. So, whoa, you did that stuff. I said, yeah, so why didn't you do it in the team? I said, yeah, well, okay, I could give it a try. And then he convinced the other guys, hey, let's do this stuff. And then the ball started rolling. So it was kind of a young guy getting into this team with established rules and how you do things that kind of gave a little nudge. Let's say it like that.
Embodying agile, really, doing it a bit more.
Yeah, so forcing didn't help. And it also doesn't make sense to tell someone to change his way of working if you're from the outside.
That makes sense. Mike, if I could come back to you, what do you see are the main barriers to automation, and how do operators push automation faster, particularly when you're thinking about domains like optical that have traditionally been really quite hands-on?
Well, I think we often focus on technology, but you have to look at process and you have to look at organization. And if you try to take a merged IP and optical automation, but you don't recognize the organizational boundaries. Sometimes it's between IP and optical, sometimes it's by opco, by country, and sometimes it's even between access, backbone, and kind of aggregation. So it's recognizing that if you're going to automate something, one, respect those organizational boundaries. If they can be changed, then challenge the teams. I love what you were talking about, building new autonomous structures, putting autonomy down on the organization. But it's also important to look at the process piece too. And if you're not looking at those different elements, we do a lot of work on taking specifically optical and automating it with IP. And we have a very sophisticated optical controller. But then we use TAPI as a northbound interface to go into our IP controller environment, recognizing that it might be Nokia in both IP and optical. Most likely it's not. And you have to have a solution that works in a multi-vendor environment. I've never met a customer that doesn't have more vendors and more legacy than everyone has I must reduce my number of vendors and I have to get rid of my legacy equipment. But it doesn't happen, and capital is hard to come by, and we're all spending it on new solutions. So building in those APIs between the layers, and then also addressing the organizational and process pieces.
And if I may just add, in terms of the process is very, very important, and also understanding the steps involved, because we take it for granted a lot of things how we deliver. And when you start delivering automation, you actually get the discipline of trying to understand every steps and then trying to get that discipline in documenting all the steps and getting that done. And by doing that, you are sort of taking the sort of knowledge from people's head into the process so that you can scale much better. So that's why the process and the understanding the steps is really important.
Yeah, and I think you need to admit or acknowledge that it might take, because of that complexity, it might take a bit more time than you thought it would take. So but you can't hurry the teams. I think you said enforcing is not an option. That's exactly also how I see it. So it's a lot about, let me say, early small wins to be celebrated, but then also bringing, especially optical and IP, bringing those different layers together. And also for us, so this is basically across organizations. You can't hurry people to do that. So I would say also for Vodafone Germany, it took us longer than we thought, but actually, finally, the outcome is really, really good. So that's also one of the major learnings for me.
That's interesting. I mean, one of the things we wanted to touch on, I mean, you talked about having sort of teams with their own authority to get on and drive the automation. But in the context of multi-domain automation, you're running across lots of different parts of the network, lots of different teams, that creates real challenges. And Sab, I wondered from the BT perspective, whether there are other things that we can learn about how you do that multi-domain automation, how you go about tackling it.
Yeah, from BT perspective, we have done automation, but a lot of those are true to stay is in certain domains or certain areas or certain pockets of automation, and trying to improve how certain tasks or certain domains could do the job better. And when you're trying to bring all that together, you need to bring all that together, and you got a lot of data. And in the morning, people spoke about data lake versus data swamp. In terms of, there is plenty of data there, but it's a matter of bringing all that together and bringing all of that capability as a single pipeline or single capability. That's quite challenging. We are at the early stage of that. And the other important one from automation perspective is we tend to try and automate the way we do things or perform tasks. But when you try to do a multi-domain complex automation, you almost need to take a step back and rethink or reimagine yourself what's the outcome you are trying to achieve, and then really try to go against that, as opposed to automate the same way as doing things. That is quite a key factor in that.
Okay, that makes sense. And Rudolf, how does the multi-domain automation work in the context of having lots of teams driving their own destiny? How do you bring that together?
Well, I can bring two aspects. So one aspect we didn't really discuss is like if you want to automate something. So one thing we had is that many automation projects would fail for a very simple reason. The IT systems were optimized for doing mass market implementations. So if an operation team would come and ask the IT team, can you please implement this feature for me? They would say, it costs you 500,000. Then they would say, well, maybe I don't do it, or maybe I just do it myself. So that's one aspect of the thing. And that's what made that many automations didn't happen with us. Now, the multi-domain problem I see as a purely architectural topic. So we say we have the autonomous domains, they expose their interfaces. You integrate against stable interfaces. You define very clearly what's your surface. We're in telco. We're doing this for 20, 30, 50 years. I mean, we know how an IP network works. We can build stable interfaces there. And so we introduced one concept, or actually NAS introduced that concept, which is a composite domain. And basically the composite domain manages the dependencies. Its sole purpose of being there is to manage the dependencies. And so that is our solution. We didn't try it out yet. We're going to try it out soon. So maybe next year we will be able to report on it. But that's how we will manage the complexity. We don't allow domains to talk to each other because that introduces these point-to-point integrations again, exactly what we want to avoid.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. And Tanja, you already mentioned the complexity of being in a big organization with, within the group, operations in many different countries. How does that change the automation story? How much more complicated does it make it? Is it just a matter of getting the right system and then everywhere works lovely, or is it?
Yeah, that's. We would be more than happy if it were like that. Unfortunately, not really. I think what you can do, and what we also did, especially from a transport perspective, we had a very clear vision what we want to achieve, what are our priorities, and what we want to go for concept-wise. And that actually, and we also defined very clear interfaces between the components we need, so that you basically can use the concept in many countries. But then it basically comes down to the network specifics in each country. And then the interfaces are still the same, but the components might then differ from country to country. But I would have said with that, we are pretty successful because in a way we can transport and transfer use cases from one country to other countries. Not completely lift and shift, but at least the concept is there, the interfaces is there, and we know exactly where we need to adapt the network specifics, so to speak.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. I've got strict instructions not to overrun because we have the awards next door. I wonder if I could just ask you each very quickly just to say, if you were to look back in 5 years' time, how would you know that automation has been a success for your organization? And obviously the vendor perspective there is going to be slightly different, but perhaps start with you, Sab, at that end.
Yeah, so if you look back a few years and compare to where we are now, in BT we have transformed quite a lot in terms of moving a lot of workloads onto cloud capability, and as an organization we transform ourselves as well in the new ways of working. And the key success is about reskilling the people and the new ways to do it, and it's a mind change. And in that, you really need to take the people with you, because it's quite key to take the people. And almost we, as a community, we need to articulate what the benefit the people get by automating. It's not a threat, it's actually a benefit. It's enhancing the way we do things. And in BT, we are seeing those transformation programs are starting to reap the benefit in terms of simplifying processes, simplifying the network, and simplifying capabilities. And also the people's mindset is changing and the way we are working. So we are on that journey, long journey, but we are on the right track.
Fantastic. Tanja, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so when I basically say in 5 years, I don't want to talk about the night shifts anymore. I basically don't want to hear about any bottlenecks or network freezes, or there are all these things that we are doing because we are sort of scared or frightened when we do a manual intervention into the network that it might fail. So that shouldn't be an issue anymore, and also so capacity issues shouldn't be any issue anymore. And yeah, it is already very resilient. I think the core transport needs to be very resilient, but most probably with automation and AI, far better ways of using our network more efficiently and build it out also more efficiently.
Okay, fantastic. Mike, vendor perspective.
So 5 years from now, I hope that we've made a significant impact for our customers and the industry overall. I do like autonomous systems and some of the TM forum work, which I think is a bit aspirational to get all the way down the path of autonomy. But I think the more we can do in delivering important use cases that help make the network more secure, that make a lot of the PC segment routing, transport slice solutions more automated across that, but not losing sight of network and service assurance, because we need to make sure that we can see that visibility. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, it's that our customers come back and say, thank you. You helped us get down the journey. So
and why not? Fantastic. Rudolf.
Yeah, so there are a number of things. So in the next 5 years, I expect that the ODMs, or 80% of the ODMs that I presented today, will be there. That means we will observe that the backlogs are independent. That means that the agile organization must be much faster and much better able to plan their work. I expect also innovations to go much faster, because you will be independent of other domains. You could roll out an optical network, or you could introduce other innovations within the domains. But I think the biggest test, or the most interesting thing in 5 years, would be if this business model unbundling actually is a thing. So is the ODMs that we have, which we did mostly for the operational reasons, does it also have a business impact?
Yeah.
So will we integrate our ODMs with partners, with other ecosystems, with other operators? I think that's an interesting question. I hope we can answer that in 5 years.
Fantastic. That's a good vision for the future. Thank you. Okay, we're pretty much out of time, and the awards will be happening next door in a minute. So I'd like to thank the panelists for a very interesting discussion. And thank you.
All right, thank you. One last thing. I mean, you guys, actually, you can stay. Let's put up the results of the Slido, and let's take a look. And how much do you think network automation, including but not limited to AI in the network, will unlock benefits in transport networks for the SP you know best? And you can see the results over there. And basically, no surprise, not only does it have likely benefits and definite benefits, it is pivotal to future success, with 2/3 of the people saying that. So I think it confirms what you were saying on the panel. Thank God it was so, yeah. Better this way than the other way, right? So, well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. And as Simon said, Simon says we go next door. So we go next door, exactly. So Simon says we're going to go into A track now, invade that side for the awards, and I'll see you over there. Thank you.